It is warm in Chicago, brother, and, with education. What do you think so far about what we've done?
Man, if you didn't have hope before that we could do this, you should definitely have it now. We just have all that we need. We have it right in our community.
Right. And we started off today with Minister Ishmael Muhammad. He gave us some really powerful words. Brother Emil Cambry gave us potentially 1.3 million jobs in technology. Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings told us that we have to develop our own teachers. We have to develop culturally competent teachers, black or white, but they've got to be people who understand us. Brother Malik Yakini, he was outstanding, man. I'm ready to go out and start farming now.
Right.
Till it turned into. And then finally, Brother Eric Grimes. And I'll just quote him once again. Anything you learn in this system can and will be used against you. That makes me afraid to learn. I'm not going to these schools, man.
You just got to make sure you're learning the right thing.
Well, we're moving right down the line. And by the way, I'm interested. One of my favorite educators is going to be coming up a little later. That's Minister Robert Floyd Plump. So hang on, Minister Plump. We're going to get you in here. But in the meantime, we have another of our educators right here in the city of Chicago. And she has developed one of the best schools in the city of Chicago, one of the best schools in the state of Illinois, and possibly one of the best schools in the country. She's an staunch educational practitioner, and she does the theory, but more importantly, she does the practice. She teaches our children, and that is Principal Nakisha Hobbs from the Village Leadership Academy. Go ahead, Principal.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing in education and for hosting this series of speakers today. As you mentioned, my name is Nakisha Hobbs, and I am the principal and co-founder of Village Leadership Academy. Just to give a little bit of background on the school, Village Leadership Academy is an independent, which means private, African-American owned and run private school that is located in the South Loop of Chicago, Illinois. We're kindergarten through 8th grade, and we are a social justice educational institution to really better understand who we are and what we do and kind of how we envision a shift in the current educational paradigm. I have to give a little bit of history about the founding of the school. So Village Leadership Academy really started as a response to a need in our community. When I was actually an undergraduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, I developed a tutoring program with some other students on campus, folks who were just really interested in the community and interested in giving back. We started to tutor at the James Jordan Boys and Girls Club. And essentially what happened is that our tutoring program turned into a test prep program. We had students who were in 3rd grade for the 2nd or 3rd time. And this was right around the time that No Child Left Behind had just come out. And so high stakes testing was really having a negative impact on our children and on communities throughout Chicagoland. And so what we found when we started to tutor students is that they were really just psychologically, mentally, really broken down, just not confident in themselves at all. And so essentially what we learned by implementing that tutoring program was that before we could start to address any of the academic issues, we had to first address the social and psychological issues that were impacting their lives. And so essentially we ended up developing a Saturday school program that was an African-centered Saturday school program because most of the students at the James Jordan Boys and Girls Club were of African descent. And essentially, we used a curriculum that really focused on the students, who they were culturally, trying to better situate them in history. And what we found is that when we started to educate them about their history, history beyond just the confines of slavery and Martin Luther King, but really just a more full and more diverse history, the students became a lot more empowered, a lot more interested, a lot more confident in themselves. And we were able to then move into tutoring students around their math and reading skills, and of course, get students to pass these standardized tests that were high stakes and really having a negative impact on them. That Saturday school program is where I really found that I had a passion for working with young people. I discovered this tremendous need in our community. And essentially, from there, decided to open up a preschool program, thinking that I never wanted another child in the city of Chicago to end up in third grade 3 times because they couldn't pass the standardized test. And so my thinking back then was that if I developed a preschool program, I could use that preschool program to really help to develop confidence in young people, but then also to send them to school with the academic and social skills that they needed to be successful. I opened up a small preschool program over on the west side. It Takes a Village. It still exists. And it was a small preschool of just about 47 children. I spent about 2 years working with those children. And at the end of the 2 years, we graduated our first class. And so we sent low-income students from the west side of Chicago, from Austin, East Garfield, and Humboldt Park into kindergarten programs, already reading at a first or second grade level, already, with a great understanding of basic math skills, basic geometry skills, having visited all of the museums in Chicago, having had hands-on experiences. And so I felt really, really good about the work that we had done in our preschool program. And parents were, really excited about the preschool. We actually started with 47 children and had a waiting list of over 150 families because of the work that we were doing with really, really young children. And after we transitioned the young people into local schools, the children and the families really started to come back to our preschool, saying that the children weren't being challenged in the same way, that they felt like the schools that they had gotten into, there really wasn't a focus on the individual child, that the students wouldn't be introduced to reading until the second semester, and their children could already read, or, until they were in first grade. And so at that time, another storefront opened up next to where our initial preschool program was. And so what we decided is that, okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll take these students back and we'll start a kindergarten program. By the end of our first year doing the kindergarten program, we had young people, 5-year-olds from the west side of Chicago, who on average were reading at an end of second grade, beginning of third grade level. And at that point, we knew that we were on to something unique. And we had really developed these strong, positive relationships with families. And we really wanted to continue that relationship, and families wanted us to do the same. And so we took a step back and we started to ask ourselves, we knew that there needed to be a shift in the current educational paradigm. And we started to ask ourselves, well, if you are going to start a school, you're going to start an independent institution, then what is the philosophy of that school? Why are you starting this school? Why is this important? And so essentially, at that point, I knew that I was, in a position where I was really, really trying to respond to a need in my community, a need for high quality, engaging educational experiences for young people. And in that moment, what we decided as Village Leadership Academy was that we wanted to develop a school that would develop young people, that would develop people who would be prepared to respond to the needs in their own community. And so we wanted really, literally, to develop a leadership academy. And so what that meant for us then and what it means for us now is that we want to provide our children with a hands-on, real-world, experiential learning experience that will really prepare them to transform and advance their communities, nations, and our world, right? And so we have at Village Leadership Academy thought about three key or three critical things that we think are important as we consider the need for this shift in the current educational paradigm. And the first thing that we think is really critically and crucially important is for our young people to really be exposed to critical thinking and perspective taking. And so instead of being really focused on getting young people to pass tests, even though, definitely being able to demonstrate learning is extremely important, we want our students to know more than just, memorizing facts. We want them to be able to take the perspectives of other people, to think critically and deeply about any information or content that is presented to them. But obviously, I'm a practitioner. I'm in the school. I work with young people. And so we really needed to make that practical. And so what we have developed is what we could call our social justice curriculum. And our social justice curriculum replaces traditional social studies programs. And what we do is we introduce our students to a chronological world history, but we do it in a way that asks them to think about themselves and their position in the world and their relationship to history, right? So we first start out with a unit that is called All About Me. And during this All About Me unit, the students really just explore who they are personally, their own personal, family stories. For example, this year, during the All About Me unit, our third graders wrote migration stories. So they interviewed people in their own families to kind of try to get a sense of their own family's history and how they ended up in Chicago. And then they shared those stories with each other and had conversations about how their migration stories were similar or different. And currently at Village Leadership Academy, we definitely have students who are from the south and west sides of Chicago who are African American students, but we also have Latino students and, Asian students, and we also have white students. So it was really, really interesting for them to write their own migration stories and to share those migration stories. In fact, a few of our students actually ended up going over to WBEZ to record via StoryCorps. And so after the All About Me unit, where the purpose of that unit is for them to think critically about their own lives, their own family, and how they ended up personally in the spaces that they are in, we go into a chronological world history. So the students get to study African history, Latin American history, Asian history, European history. But as they're studying history and they're looking at these critical or key moments in history, we're asking them to look for the perspectives that are not being presented. So the question that we're always asking our students is, okay, you're hearing this story about this critical event in history, but whose perspective are you hearing this story from? What voice is not being heard? If we did hear that voice, what might it say? And how does this event in the past, how does this affect or influence our life today? And so obviously we end up having these young people who are very interested in history, their own personal histories, but the histories of other people, interested in culture, but they're interested in a way that is not just about memorizing facts and knowing what happened, but really questioning how events of today and how events of the past, how it affects their lives, their lived experience. And that really helps our students to develop those key critical thinking skills that we think are important to be successful in the world today. And so what we started to notice as our students were being engaged in this social justice curriculum, and this is just something that happened naturally, our students wanted more. They didn't want to just learn history and imagine what they would have done if they were in some different time point in history. They wanted to act, right? So they wanted to start to engage the world right now today. And so what the second kind of key component or critical part of Village Leadership Academy are our grassroots campaigns. And really what our grassroots campaigns do is that they allow our students starting in kindergarten through 8th grade to engage in real world problem solving. So they start to apply the academic skills that they are learning in school to really solve a problem in their community. So during the All About Me unit, one of the things that our students will do is they will identify a problem that they believe exists in their community that lowers the quality of life either for themselves or for people that they care about. And they spend the entire year really researching the root cause of that problem and developing and implementing an action plan to address that issue. So we have had first graders who were interested in the problem of homelessness. So they, first graders come into class and they say, hey, well, one of the things that we think is a problem in our community is that there are too many people who are homeless. In fact, there are students in my school who have themselves experienced homelessness, and they believe that that is a problem that negatively impacts their lives. And so the students, first grade students, actually did a project where they met with people who were formerly homeless to interview them to find out, what led to homelessness. And so first graders were able to articulate that sometimes, not having access to a livable wage or mental illness or drug or alcohol addiction may be things that lead to people not being able to afford a place to live. They volunteered at a homeless shelter, but then in addition to volunteering at a homeless shelter, they raised money to purchase toys for that homeless shelter. So we have first graders who raised $1,000 as 6-year-olds to support a homeless shelter. But even more critically is that they began to ask themselves, well, who are the influential forces? Who are people in our community who can really address this issue? And so they partnered with the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and they realized that the governor was actually in a position to put additional monies in the budget to support homeless youth. And so we have first graders who wrote letters to the governor, who went to the governor's office and delivered those letters and met with his chief of staff and basically lobbied the governor to put $4 million in the budget to support homeless youth. In that year, the governor did, in fact, put that additional $4 million in the budget to support homeless youth. And so our young people were able to really engage, use their academic and social skills to really solve a real world problem, a problem that they believe affect their lives. And so that not only happens in our first grade program, and it not only happens around issues of homelessness, we've had students who have began to tackle issues like, food deserts or police brutality.
Please. 2 minutes,
I'm
please.
sorry?
2 more minutes,
okay.
Please.
All right, great. And so it's been, it's a really real thing that we need to do is really start to engage our young people in real world problem solving. And then the third thing that I think is critically important is for our young people to really know and understand that they are global citizens and that they have global responsibility. And these things all happen naturally as young people are solving problems in their own community, being exposed to critical thinking and chronological world history. We are also at Village Leadership Academy traveling internationally with our students through our World Scholars Program. So at VLA, our students will actually study one particular international community of focus and actually travel to that place. So our students have studied places like Brazil, South Africa, most recently Cuba, and in addition to studying those places and social systems, they actually had the opportunity to travel to those places. So just to wrap up, as I think about the shift that definitely needs to occur in education, we absolutely have to have a focus on experiential learning, where we're really making learning real. We have to really be focused on developing really physically engaged young people who have a sense of their own personal power, but who also know that it is their responsibility to use their personal power to impact what happens in our world around social issues, economic issues, political issues, so forth and so on. And finally, I definitely invite whoever is interested to come to see our program in action, to sit down and talk to me or talk to our young people about what's working at Village Leadership Academy and how we can improve. We are online. Folks can look us up at www.blacademy.org or give us a call at 312-675-0056. Again, I think that this is a really key and critical conversation for us to be having right now, and I'm definitely excited to be a part of the conversation.
Well, Principal Hobbs, just one question for me. What kind of audacity does it take for a young person like yourself to say, I'm going to start my own school and I'm going to teach the things that I know children need to be taught? I mean, so that's the question. What kind of courage does it take? What kind of audacity does it take? And how can we replicate that in young people like yourself?
Yeah, I really, really think it is the approach. It is really definitely exposing young people to a more diverse history. I think it's important for young people throughout the United States to be introduced to a more a more holistic, right, history of the United States, to really see realistically that throughout the history of the United States and throughout the history of the world, it's just been regular people who have done extraordinary things. And I think that it is just definitely important for us to get that message across to all the young people that we have in front of us in our classrooms, because I think what is happening currently, and honestly, educators currently are also, I think, victims of a system that tells us that power exists outside of us instead of within us. And I was fortunate enough to be educated by some of the premier educators in our world. So I'm a student of Gloria Lasson-Billings. You know, I've read her work. I've, sat in sociology classes, but I'm also a student of Baba Hannibal Afrique, who, when I was a young child, I attended the Shule Ya Watoto, where I learned about people who had done extraordinary things. And so I think that is the same gift that I strive to give to the young people in Village Leadership Academy.
Thank you, and we appreciate it, and we're going to make sure that you get a copy of this. And thank
you so much.
Absolutely. And we're running a little bit behind in our schedule because we do want to get Minister Plump on, but we've got our last presenter of the day. He's CEO and founder of the Village of Wisdom in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. He's a former Echoing Green Fellow, and he was an outstanding teacher in the Atlanta public school system. He just gave it all up and said, man, I don't know what they're doing, but I want to teach children. I present to you Mr. William Jackson from Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Mr. Jackson?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, sir. And I'm sorry we're coming to you a little bit late. I apologize for that. But thank you for holding on. And sir, please go right ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again for having me. Really excited about talking to everybody tonight, and hopefully I'll say something that is useful and will move people forward. And it was also just really fortunate to hear my sister that just got done. I'm at the Village Leadership Academy, and so inspired by the work that they're doing, and I think most likely folks will see some overlap. And so I'll just kind of get kicked off with a story. So one day I was sitting in a room, and a young man named Wesley asked me this question. He said, I want to know who came up with the idea that Black people are less than. And to give some context to this question, I was sitting in the room with Wesley and about 9 parents and probably another 14 or 15 of his peers. And so when he asked me this question of like who came up with the idea that Black people are less than, it was because I had asked him and his friends, these teenagers, probably ranging from ages of like 15 down to 9, what they wanted to know about Black history. And I just think it's always interesting when we ask kids questions, like instead of, necessarily teaching them Black history, but asking them what they want to know about Black history, it really illuminates some interesting things. And I went through, kind of an explanation of pseudoscience and how these ideas have been popularized about Negroids and Mongoloids and all these other things that I won't get into. But I thought Wesley's question really got at the point of the organization that I've started called Village of Wisdom. And the point is that as long as our children are walking around questioning their value, that's precious cognitive energy, that's precious cognitive capacity that they're using to worry about who they are as opposed to what it is that they're learning. And so in our work with Village of Wisdom, we frequently use an analogy about a bag. And what we say is we actually ask parents that we're working with, we ask them to think about the fears that they have for their children. And since we work primarily with Black families, we then ask them, after they've thought about those fears for their children, how those fears would change if their child was white. And invariably what ends up happening is that the parents begin to list these things. And while they're listing these different items, we actually have a bag with us, right? The bag says Black Genius on the front of it. And we have this bag filled with items. And as they list things like getting followed around by the police, we take items out of the bag. Being questioned whether or not they're supposed to be in a gifted class, we take an item out of the bag. Being judged because of their skin color, we take an item out of the bag. And so they continue to list things until we leave, until the bag is empty. And what we say to our parents and the families that we're working with is that every day this is what happens to our kids because of the negative messages that they hear around their Blackness, that they hear associated with Blackness. And so we have to be careful because the world will empty our children out. And so if we're not prepared to protect that bag and to make sure that people aren't reaching into it, and if we're not actually doing the work of putting items back into the bag, right? So affirming our children, telling them that they're Black genius, telling them that they're more than capable, telling them that their Blackness is beautiful, telling them that, George Washington Carver was an amazing scientist, telling them that all of these people that have come before them have done amazing things and look just like them, and what's inside of them is similar to those people, then their bag will be emptied and they won't have anything to give to the world and they won't have anything for themselves. And so the work of Village of Wisdom, we call it protecting Black genius. And what we mean by that is we mean protecting that bag that I'm referring to. And so I just wanted to give that context before I really jumped in and kind of told people who I was and the work that we're doing, and hopefully that pulls some folks in. So now I'll introduce myself and just say that my name is William Jackson. I'm super excited to be on here. I lead an organization again called Village of Wisdom, and I am a former school teacher. I taught in Atlanta public schools and had a great deal of success in the school system's eyes, and that my children, the students that were in my classes, got really high test scores. But if you listen to that sentence, that really doesn't say a lot about me. It says more about them, right? They got high test scores. And it was because I was immediately pretty good at packaging information and making it so that they could understand it and make it so that they could regurgitate it on a test. And that's actually what ended up being really frustrating for me because I didn't choose to become a teacher so that I could help kids get high test scores. And the end of course test scores, as a lot of people know, don't really get you into schools, right? They don't get you into an SAT. They're not an SAT score. They're not an ACT score. Nobody checks your ninth grade physical science score to get into a college. And so that was frustrating for me because I was actually helping kids do well on something that wasn't necessarily going to predict their outcome in life. And what I really wanted to understand was how did kids become independent learners? How did they become self-regulated learners? And so I ended up leaving the school, right? Like, despite the fact that I had really high test scores and kids were doing, probably the best in the district, I left because that wasn't what I was there for. And probably half of the kids were ready to do super well in life, right? Because they were independent learners and they had these life skills. And another half, maybe not so much. But I wasn't doing anything to move them on the needle. And so that was just really frustrating for me. And so I left to go to grad school and I learned a lot about how kids learned. And I'll stop here to drop one more kind of piece of information. And it's just around this idea of working memory. And if you think about working memory, it's how people take information into their mind, right? So if you think about the mind as a highway, if you've ever seen an accident on a highway, the accident stops the cars from actually traveling down the highway. And so whenever we get upset or we get angry, or something is going on, or our attention is diverted, that's like an accident on our highway. And what folks have actually found out is that when you experience discrimination or when you experience racism, it actually reduces your mental health, right? And so that means that's an accident on your highway, in your information highway, and it's eating up your working memory. And we know that Black kids actually experience discrimination at really high rates. Some studies rated as like 93% of them will say that they've experienced some type of discrimination in school over a 3-month period. And we know that, that 3 to 4 times is likely to be suspended for the same thing in schools, right? So they recognize that I have a cell phone, this white kid has a cell phone, I'm the one that's getting suspended, he's not. So the kids are picking up on this discrimination, and so they're having these accidents in their mind, and nobody is actually attending to the accident. And if you've ever been on a highway where the accident hasn't been attended to, then you know that the accident doesn't move. And if the accident doesn't move, then the cars can't flow. And if we're not removing these accidents from these kids' minds, then that means that the information can't flow to their minds. And so we have a lot of kids that are really kind of languishing in our classrooms, and we don't really understand why. And we should understand why, because we are putting them through this mental stress and nobody's actually speaking to it. And so when I kind of put all of this stuff together, that we have children that are actually trying to work through these discrimination events and some of the other trauma that they're going through in their homes because of systemic and historical oppression, and we haven't addressed it. And then we wonder why the kids are frustrated. Well, it's because we as adults aren't really looking at the own research. This research exists out there, right? There's research called cognitive load theory and working memory theory, and people know this information, but haven't thought about it in the context of Black children and other kids of color as well. And so the work of Village of Wisdom, like I said, is to protect the bag. And in this particular situation is to alert folks that there's actually an accident that's happening in this kid's minds. And until we put some good messages about Blackness, until we affirm their Blackness, then we can't actually remove those accidents from the mind. And so there's a lot of researchers from the racial socialization field, that's a sociology field. Howard Stevenson is one of these people, Enrique Neblett. These are people that you can look up, Stephanie Cord, that do research on how parents talk to their kids about race. And what we found out is that when parents actually share more positive messages with their children about being Black, then those kids actually end up being more resilient to experiencing discrimination in schools. And so when I found that out, I was just like, well, we need to be doing this on purpose, right? Like, because if I can encourage a parent to affirm their child's Blackness more frequently, then that means that this child is actually going to do better in school despite experiencing discrimination. Because what I saw was that a lot of people wanted to work with Black kids, but nobody wanted to talk about the fact that they were Black. And so if you have Black children and they're being treated differently because of their skin color and nobody wants to address that, and then we still have an achievement gap, it seems clear to me that you would actually have to address that particular issue. And when I found out about racial socialization research, I was like, well, how do we apply this? And so Village of Wisdom has become this mechanism to do this work that we call protecting Black genius. And so ultimately, what we're looking to do here is to find out different ways to get parents to affirm their Blackness. And I'll tell one more quick story before I get to kind of the complete application part. So when I was growing up, I didn't actually know that white scientists existed. Every time I heard about scientists, it was Charles Drew or George Washington Carver, or whoever it was that my mom was telling me about. And so she had convinced me that basically all scientists were Black. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even really realize that this was kind of the thing that she was doing, because it wasn't until probably middle school that I realized that there were like other scientists out there, scientists that didn't look like Black folks. And I had a microscope and I wanted glasses so I could look like a scientist, and a lab coat and all these other things. And it was crazy because I thought that, going into undergrad, that I wanted to make artificial organs because I saw an artificial organ on a Popular Mechanics magazine. But actually, when I thought about it, it was because my mom really lifted up Charles Drew, and she told me that, hey, this is who you could be, right? So you got this guy that's giving blood transfusions, and so it's no surprise that 10 years later, what do I want to do is try to advance that research. And so I just tell that story to say that a lot of times there's probably parents out there listening, and I just want to encourage them that these positive messages that you're giving to your child, that you're telling them that, you know, Black is beautiful and you're lifting up these Black heroes, just know that your work is not going to go unrewarded. And actually what the research shows is that the more you do it, the more likely it is that your child is going to be more resilient in this particular political climate. And I know that means a lot, especially kind of on the precipice of a Trump presidency. And so the thing that I'll lift up is there's 5 specific pieces of Black genius that we've identified as elements within our organization. And this came after a year of work with parents in our community here in Durham. And before I give you the 5 elements, I just want to tell you what Black genius is. Black genius is the idea that it's something within us that allows us to create new systems of equity and justice, right? So that we are creating the world that we want to see, like the woman who was just speaking talked about a Village Academy, where she's encouraging these kids to push for a world that they want to see, a just world that's kind of built off of this research that Gloria Lansing-Billings listed up in culturally relevant pedagogy. So that's what Black genius is, right? So Ben Carson, unfortunately, doesn't get to be Black genius because he's not trying to build a more just world, but maybe like Eric Holder can have that title, right? So it's not just about being smart, it's about being smart for equity. And so our 5 elements for Black genius are, the first one is understanding what the interest of a child is, right? If we don't know what the interest of a child is, then we can't motivate that child. So we have to understand what the interests of our children are and use that as the energy, the gas, the motivation they need to learn. The second one that we have is a can-do attitude or growth mindset. And what we find is that when kids see failure as an opportunity to learn, when they see challenge as an opportunity to grow, that those kids approach life differently. And they also recognize that intelligence isn't a fixed thing. It's actually a thing that you can grow. So the harder I work, the smarter I can become. And if that is the case, then that means just because I'm Black, that means that I can become smarter despite what any kind of stereotypes that happen, right? And so it actually directly impacts kids' ability to navigate stereotype threat, which is something folks can look up. I won't get into it right now. The other thing is the thing that we talked about already, which is racial identity development. We need kids to develop a positive racial identity in order for them to be more resilient to experiences of discrimination. And then we have cultural navigation. That is, we need kids to move across different cultural environments, from their churches to their basketball courts to the football field to other countries, right? Because we don't necessarily want our kids just to code switch to white culture. We want our kids to be global citizens. And they can't be global citizens if we're not lifting up how they're already moving across different cultural environments and how that skill is actually really important for them to be in the future, right? So how do we expose kids to different cultural environments? And then finally, we talk about selective trust. And the reason why we talk about selective trust is that there's some research that's been put out around vulnerability. It's a woman named Brene Brown. It's on Oprah. It's been on other places. But she just talks about this idea that if I can't trust you, then I can't love you, right? And if I can't trust you, then I can't create with you. And if I can't love and I can't create, then what kind of classrooms are we in? And so often we find our kids are in situations where they don't trust their teachers. And so what we're positing at Village of Wisdom is that we actually need to lift up each one of these genius elements. We need to find out what our kids are interested in, how they're moving across different cultural environments. Do they have a can-do attitude? Do they see their Blackness as a positive? And do they have people in their lives that they can trust? Because if they can't trust, then they can't love, and they can't create this new world that's going to be more equitable and more just. And so if folks want to run down on kind of that particular Black.
We're a little bit behind time, so if you can wind down for us, please.
Yep. So the only thing I was going to leave people with is just the link to get to the Black Genius card, which runs down those 5 elements, which is it's at bit.ly, so bit.ly /B, like the letter B, genius card. So it's bit.ly /B genius card. Or you can go to blackgenius.com or villageofwisdom.org, and those are 2 websites, and you can kind of navigate to it from there. So yeah, I can wrap up there and say thanks so much for the time.
Mr. Jackson, thank you. And if anyone wants to get in contact with Mr. Jackson, how would they do that?
So you can definitely go through either blackgenius.com or villageofwisdom.org, or you can get directly to my email at WP as in Peter Jackson at villageofwisdom.org.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. It's been a great day, and you've been a great end to a lot of great educators, and we will be calling on you soon.
Sounds good. Y'all have a good one.
All right.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Brother Troy, we did it. But Brother Troy, you've got some people on the board. Can you give them 1 minute each, and then we're going to get out of here?
As long as they understand that they're going to only have 1 minute. So let's go to Brother Minister Plump. You're on the line.
We are Yah Shalom. Who are we don't die. We multiply like power forever. Good. Assalamu alaikum.
Good assalam,
Happy
sir.
Thanksgiving. All right. Well, I just want everybody to know that, education is a key to our success, breeds success. And I believe, just like you, Dr. Phil Jackson, education or die. And I want people to know that I am a member of the Black Star Project.
Yes,
and
sir.
we're with you 110, and we are in it to win, and it's not over with until we win as a people. As I said, education is the key to success, breeds success, and our men, women, and children need to know that the average brain size of all human beings, especially Black people, is 99.5. It's the normal brain size. And that equals to 23, which we teach a PMA class, a holistics class, and that's a superstar class because we are the chosen children of God, which is the Israelites, original, as Yahshua, the Lord of the world, who most know as Jesus Christ, is a Black man, a Black guy. The things that he said this, the things that I do, you can do also, and even greater things. So this is the day, this is the time, and you couldn't have selected a better day.
No, sir. Where can we find you on Sundays?
Okay, thank you very much for asking. This Sunday, we're going to be at the Swift Mansion location, which is 4500 South Michigan, which is November the 27th from 2:30 to 4:30. And we have jobs and businesses for our people. And people can reach us for more information at thehellwashingtonfoundation.com.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
All right.
God bless
We're going to
you.
go to Brother Ja. We're going to have to keep it to the time. 1 minute. Brother Ja.
Greetings from the local organizing committee of Chicago to Dr. Phil and Brother Troy and your amazing, very distinguished guests. And I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the Super Ujama Market right there at Mosque Mariam from 10 to 3. So we all can shop with dozens of Black merchants under one roof. And I just want to emphasize one thing that came out in the last 3 hours. It's the connectedness of the education to employment. I'm a very a fond supporter of Dr. Claude Anderson's Powernomics principles. And Dr. Anderson said that we need to stop sending so many of our children to college. They don't need to go to college. What happens is they get a degree, but they don't get a job. And the ones who do get a job, the jobs take them out of our neighborhood, so there's no neighborhood benefit, no community benefit for our people. What we want is right now jobs, like your last guest said. We need to teach them something that will better predict their outcome in life. Mm-hmm. And as Brother Grind said a couple hours ago, we must be able to connect education to immediate jobs. Dr. Anderson said we must not graduate students unless they have a trade in their hands and a scheme in their head. And that requires Black-owned businesses. And we have those jobs right here, but the businesses aren't controlled by us. Construction jobs, landscaping.
And Brother John, we appreciate it. We appreciate it, but we're locked for time. We want to get this last one in, but we definitely look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 7351 South Stony Island. Thank you. Brother Aaron, we got you for about 30 seconds.
Yes, I appreciate that, and thank you for this show, dear brothers, Brother Troy and Brother Phil. It's Brother Aaron X from the Local Justice Organizing Committee in Chicago and also on the Nation of Islam. I just want to tell Brother Phil Jackson, I've said this personally, but we appreciate a guy with your profession and background that's willing to stand up with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. We know that the minister speaks from a prison without bars due to the unfair classification of being racist and anti-Semite, anti-white. But we thank you, dear Brother Phil, for standing with the minister, and we know that there's a cross to bear to do that, but we are ushering in a new world, and part of that is the new educational paradigm. So thank you, Dr. Phil, and may God bless you in all your endeavors and what you do.
Thank you, Brother Aaron.
Thank you, brother. Hey, I just want to thank everybody, and especially Melody Span Cooper, Pierre Cooper, Todd Renkowski, the governor, Cliff Kelly, Brother Troy. I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our guests, everything from Brother Ishmael, Emil Cambry, Dr. Gloria Latson-Billingsley, Malik Yakini, Eric Grimes, Nakisha Hobbs, William Jackson. They made this day outstanding, and we want to thank all the people out there in the audience who took time on their Thanksgiving holiday to listen to us. Last words, brother?
Brother, I just look forward to the next thing. We're going to keep on moving. It's not just about the talk, but it's about the work.
The talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation. 1690 WVON, Berwyn, Chicago.
Most of the hungry people and families work, but one of the biggest challenges for them is they don't earn enough to feed their families after paying for fixed expenses like rent and utilities.
Many Americans rushed through dinner today to get down to the local retailer and cash in on Thanksgiving bargains. Correspondent Karen Kafa says retailers' bottom lines are banking on it this holiday shopping season.
Retailers will watch how much Americans spend, but also where they spend it, department stores or discounters, and how, checking off items early or holding out for better deals, a penchant for value.